Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's session, Unpacking the NDIS Changes. Just to let you know that we are recording this session. Instructions for those who wish to add closed captions are going to be in the Q&A. I'll just talk you through it anyway, but you will find those instructions in the Q&A. If you do want to add in closed captions, there's an option to do so through Teams by clicking the three little dots at the top, click More, then click Language and Speech and select Show Live Captions. Any questions today that you have can be asked in the Q&A section. We've structured it slightly differently, so it's not just a chat, it's a Q&A, and so they sort of stick together like threads, and it's pretty cool. And they're going to be answered by our amazing team of Riddy, Tash, Bella, Melina, and Roz. We're going to provide you with some useful links in the Q&A towards the end of the presentation. And the very first question that most people ask, I'll answer straight away. We're going to provide a follow-up email with a link to this presentation as well. My name is Justine and I'm here today with Jamie, and we're very excited to be with you on behalf of Plan Partners to help make sense of the recent NDIS updates and what they mean for participants, providers and support networks. We know that change can often bring uncertainty, but our goal today is to bring some clarity, confidence and context to what's new and how to navigate it. And just to keep you all on your toes, Jamie and I have most indeed performed a hair colour swap for this webinar since those photos were taken, and I probably put on about 10 kilos as well. But anyway, let's move on. Jamie.
Thank you, Justine, and hello, everybody. I would like to begin today by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we meet. Today, I come to you from the land of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and I pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging. For anyone that hasn't heard of us, Plan Partners is a national plan manager. We have offices all over Australia and are on the ground in the community as much as possible, organising events and education sessions like this one to support our community. A quick snapshot of what we'll be covering today. We're going to dive straight into the Section 33 changes to NDIS plans, what they are and why they matter, the enhancements to our dashboard, and enhancements to how we process service agreements to accommodate these changes. Updates to therapy funding, including the new travel therapy claiming rules as a result of the latest pricing arrangement. And we'll also allow time for the Q&A at the end, so feel free to put your questions in the Q&A box as we go along. I'm going to hand back to Justine for service agreements. Oh, for Section 33, sorry.
Yes, don't jump the gun too soon. So Section 33, how on earth did we get here? Back in 2019, you might remember that the Tune Review came out and David Tune called for more flexible budgets 6 years ago, with exceptions only for major capital supports and SDA. In 2022, the Act gave the NDIA stronger powers around plan management and variations, but didn't fundamentally change how funding was structured. Then roll into NDIS 2.0, the second independent review, that built on recommending framework plans with funding periods to help participants manage budgets sustainably. And PACE was introduced alongside this to help cope with this change. Those recommendations became law in 2024 with Section 33, setting out the legal requirements for the statement of participant supports within a participant's plan. It requires the plan to specify reasonable and necessary supports, how they are funded and categorised, and whether they are flexible or stated. So the most recent amendments to Section 33, probably amendment might not be the right word to use there, came into effect on the 19th of May this year and introduced us to total funding amounts, funding components and funding periods to the Statement of Participant Supports. You may have noticed these changes actually commenced back in October last year, but everyone's attention back then was pretty much firmly planted on the ins and outs list, but funding components and funding periods did actually come into force last October, but they were for 12 months, so we didn't really notice much of a change. So what do these funding words mean? Well, a total funding amount is nothing really that new. It's how much the plan's been funded for. It's the total amount of funding allocated for all reasonable and necessary supports within a plan. Funding components, these components are supports that are grouped into funding components with specific amounts allocated to each. And funding periods. These are fixed timeframes that determine when and how much of a participant's funding is available. In other words, a funding period is the time that part of the plan's funding becomes available and how long it needs to last. Jamie's going to talk a little bit more about funding periods in a little bit. So what does this mean for participants? These changes mean essentially that participants will see more structured plans with clear budgeting and timelines and 35-page documents to accompany all of that for accessing their funding. They'll also see an increase in plan terms increasing from 1 year to anywhere up to 5 years. And we're certainly seeing a lot of 5-year plans coming through at the moment because the NDIS has the ability to chunk down how that funding has been spent. Overall, the changes to Section 33 are intended to make the NDIS planning process more transparent, easier to understand, and more effective in supporting participants to achieve their goals. Jamie.
Thank you, Justine. So with all of that in mind and with the introduction of funding periods, we have reviewed and updated how funding information is displayed on both our participant and support coordinator dashboards. Our goal was ultimately to retain the familiar experience as much as possible while introducing a few enhancements to present the relevant information more clearly and simply. For any support coordinators on the call today, you may very well have participants on 3 different types of plans, being PROTA, PACE, and even PACE with funding periods. And with the latest enhancements to our dashboard, we've accommodated for all 3. It's not unlikely that we will soon be looking at a 4th different type of plan when the new framework plans are finalised. We expect to see some changes when needs assessments come into play, and the NDIS did hint at this on their website when they answered this question: why is capacity building not flexible with core? With this answer being the way plans are built and funding allocated across core, capacity building and capital budgets is not changing until the new planning framework commences. This includes no changes to flexibility within and across these budgets, and this suggests that the framework plan will allow for greater flexibility due to a change in how they are built from the onset. So, the key 4 changes we have made to the participants dashboard to better align with Section 33 updates are an improved participant and plan overview, increased transparency on the status of invoices, overview of released funds, and a detailed breakdown of funding periods. So let's really dive into that now. Starting strong, we have introduced this new banner, and it is the first thing you'll see at the top of a participant's dashboard for all plan types. The My Plan section gives you a complete overview of your plan details, the total amount of funds managed by plan partners, how much the NDIS has released and is available to spend, and how many days left in the plan, and how many invoices are awaiting approval. This dashboard, we think, would be agile enough to deal with what the new framework plans will bring. And if there is any changes to plan flexibility, the new dashboard will not have to change to accommodate these, which is really good because it's one less change we all have to deal with. If we go a little bit further down on the page in the dashboard under funding component overview, you'll get a handy visual snapshot of the funding and how the components are tracking in the plan. Funding components are the key building block of the new framework plans. They replace the old support categories and make it possible to have budgets that are partly flexible, partly stated, and paced out over the funding periods. In other words, components are the architecture that will let plans in the future be both more flexible for participants and more sustainable for the scheme. You can click on Core, Capital, or Capacity Building tabs to filter information to each of these components. And you'll notice in paper plans, the components are all listed together, and we've grouped the components logically under banners that make sense to everyone, keeping the terminology Core, Capacity Building, and Capital. In this view, we will only show the released amount and not the total amount of the component. The total amount is shown if you drill down on each component. It is possible that each component will have a different funding period. So this is why we have moved the tracking bar from this first view to where you drill down to each component. When working out the funding periods, the NDIA would consider the following matters: previous spending, whether a participant is at risk of fraud or exploitation, the wishes of the participant, whether there is a risk of the total funding in the participant's plan being exceeded, the total funding amount for the plan and the nature of the supports, and whether the participant has requested a variation or reassessment of any of the participant's plans more than once without providing information about a change of circumstance. We have noticed many plans have a larger amount funded in their first funding period, such as assistive technology, which is often pushed into the first funding period. And if SIL is funded and irregular supports are needed, the additional irregular amounts have been seen to be funded in the first period so that it can be used flexibly. The so-called front loading can be seen in other components too, such as improved daily living or behaviour support, where there is a recognised need for more intense supports at the beginning of the plan. Another question we often receive is, can invoices cover more than one funding period? The advice from the NDIS website and in practice is yes. A provider can claim for services delivered in a previous funding period, as long as the dates of the invoice fall within the plan. The current funding period must also have sufficient remaining or unspent funds rolled over from the previous period to cover the claim. But we'll talk a bit more about funding periods on the next slide. Okay, so in each support category overview, you can explore your funding for current funding. You can explore the funding for the current funding periods, which includes how much has been released, how much has been spent, how much has been reserved by service providers, and how much you have left to spend. You can see here where the tracking bar appears. In this example, the participant is underspending their plan. Any unspent amounts will roll into the next funding period. And if this was tracking at an overspend, the question often asked is, can funding be brought forward? The answer, according to the frequently answered questions page on the NDIS website, is funding from a future funding period generally cannot be brought forward. In exceptional circumstances, the NDIA may bring forward a future funding period if there's an urgent need. This, however, won't change the amount of funding that has been funded in the plan, so careful budgeting is still needed to ensure that there's enough funding to meet the support needs later on in the plan. If a participant's situation has changed and they need more or different supports, they can contact the NDIA to request a change to their plan. While the law doesn't spell out a ban on bringing future funding forward, the whole point of funding periods is to pace spending and stop budgets being exhausted early on in the plan. Allowing funds to be brought forward kind of ruins this and would defeat the purpose of it. You can also view a funding release summary for the current funding period on the dashboard. Here you can see the number of days until the next funds will be released, how much will be released, and the amount of funding periods for this support category in the NDIS plan. Under the funding period schedule, you also get a breakdown of all of the funding periods for this support category. Again, it is important to note that funding periods and amounts attached to them do not need to be equally spread at all. In this breakdown, you can also see the total amount funded for each component. In summary, we really do appreciate the introduction of funding components, and funding periods has created an element of confusion. We have attempted to retain the familiar experience as much as possible while introducing a few enhancements to present the relevant information more clearly and simply. Now I'll hand over to Justine for service agreements.
Thanks, Jamie. That was a lot. I actually am really proud of how the team have built that dashboard to respond to all the different types of plans that we are currently seeing, and then being able to really clearly articulate how each of those components get broken down into their funding periods. And it's not unusual to see 1 month, 3 month, and 12-month funding periods in one person's plan. What I'm going to talk about now is service agreements and the enhancements that we've been able to make through our dashboard to respond to funding periods and service agreements in particular. Service agreements have always been quarantined by plan partners for years now, and it's always been such a powerful tool for participants in terms of being confident that their supports are going to be paid for, and the provider being confident that they're going to be paid, full stop. A unique feature that we have here now is to be able to reserve funds from a portion of participants' support categories or their components as agreed upon between the participant and their service provider. And they can do this with a service agreement, and we need a few tweaks made to those service agreements if you do have participants who are on funding periods. It does give those participants and their support providers certainty and clarity about what support will be delivered, and comfort knowing that the funding exists to pay for those supports. Plan Partners has been able to really manage, and we are actually still going to make some more improvements on how it appears on the dashboard, but we're really proud, I don't know if I've mentioned that, but we are really proud that we are able to respond to service agreements, because we know that it's a massive challenge in the sector to try and figure out how to deal with such small chunks, particularly the 3-month periods and the 1-month funding periods. So you'll see on your dashboard, service agreements are now split up according to those funding periods, and you'll see when they are inactive or they've actually expired. You'll see the funding period, the service agreement proportions that are coming up in the upcoming funding period. And it really does give you some certainty that those funds are locked in against those funding periods, and there is enough funding in those funding periods to service those service agreements. But what do we need from participants and providers in order to do all this? Because it's not just us that are doing all this hard work. It's absolutely participants and providers as well. So, due to the structure of the new plans, which includes the funding periods and funding components, we now will display them separately, like I said, for each funding period, and it clarifies how much funds are reserved over each block of time. Just got to get rid of an email that just came over the top of my presentation. That's fun. These updates support our shift for funding periods while ensuring we can continue to service existing customers with old plans. So even though we've got participants with funding periods, we've also got a large number of participants who have not been moved across to funding periods yet. So service agreements are still going to be operating across all the different types of plans. But what do we need from a provider? What we need from a provider is pretty much what we've always asked for in a service agreement, but with a couple more things. We need the provider's Australian business number. We need the participant's details, their name and their NDIS number. We need the service dates aligned with the funding periods and the corresponding amounts. We need the amounts required from each support category or component. We need totals as well. We also need the service agreement to be signed by the authorised person, whether it's the participant, the nominee, whoever it is, the authorised support coordinator. And we need that clear breakdown of what is to be applied against each funding period, because we're not going to make it up and chuck it in. We need you to tell us this. I'm sure there's plenty of questions around service agreements, so we'll definitely come back to that in the Q&A section. But what we'll do now is move across to therapy pricing and what happened on the 1st of July. The three key changes are the way that therapy supports are being claimed, updates to therapy pricing itself, and also provider travel, which is a little bit controversial. Also controversial in that same thread, I guess you could say it's controversial, is that we are going to continue to claim therapy from a core budget. Back in the pricing arrangements and price limits document from last year, the NDIS published in there that they were going to remove the therapy-related line items from the support catalogue under core. And then they didn't. So plan partners have actually taken the position that we are going to allow customers to claim disability-related health supports from their core budget until further notice. And this is sort of an explanation as to why. The NDIS policy relating to the claiming of therapy supports is pretty complex and grey. It probably doesn't need to be. At Plan Partners, we are constantly assessing and reviewing our approach to support participants to navigate the scheme the best way possible. We've revised our approach and will continue to allow for people to claim therapy from their core budget until further notice, because those temporarily duplicated line items from 2019 are still in this financial year's support catalogue. We'll continue to monitor the NDIS policy and will advise of any changes to our position, noting that there is still that intent that the NDIS will remove those line items sometime in the future. On your screen now, there's just a list of those therapy-related line items that is currently still sitting in core. Now on to some more juicy therapy news. Jamie.
Controversial indeed. Thank you, Justine. Additional changes that we've seen come into effect from the 1st of July specific to therapy supports also included the removal of state-based pricing differences for physios and psychologists. These have been replaced now with a single national maximum price per hour. It should be noted that remote and very remote pricing structures do still apply for those supports. Under the new NDIS pricing arrangement, travel claims for therapy supports have also been reduced. As a provider delivering therapy supports, you can now only claim up to 50% of the therapy rate for the travel time, which is calculated on a pro rata basis. This is further restricted by the time allowed for those servicing participants in the MMS 1 to 3 areas, as this is limited to 30 minutes each way for travel. Where a worker is travelling to provide services to more than one participant in a region, it is reasonable for the provider to apportion all of the travel time, including the return journey where applicable, between the participants who receive the support from the worker. This appointment should be agreed with each participant in advance as part of the service agreements. In addition to our dashboard updates, our online resources such as the Price Guide Navigator and NDIS Budget Calculator have also been updated in line with the latest annual pricing review. We've also taken the opportunity to improve some of our behind the scenes processes in relation to how we handle and process invoices. This means no change to you on how you submit and lodge your invoices, but as a result of the changes we've implemented, participants and providers will now have a quicker visibility via the dashboard to the invoices that have been lodged and their status, and also a shorter turnaround time on average for invoices lodged, claimed, and paid. We've done all of this while improving our error checking and fraud detection. I would also like to take a moment to acknowledge that whilst we were making these updates, some of our turnaround times and response times fell below what you would expect of us. For that, I'd like to apologise, but I'd also like to thank you for your continued support. We certainly do not take it for granted. In summary, we have updated our dashboard to increase the awareness of invoice status and those awaiting approval, show a simple view of those funds that have been released, provide a detailed breakdown of the funding periods for each plan, and we've also improved our fraud and error detection.
Thanks, Jamie. If anybody on the call today would like some more information, or if you'd like our team to come and give you a more in-depth demonstration of our dashboard and our tools and resources, please do reach out to one of the state managers on your screen at the moment, and we'll connect you with one of our business relationship managers, because we just like handballing them off. We love actually speaking to people as well. We're going to now open up to some Q&A. Tash, if you want to chuck your microphone on and your camera on, what are we seeing in the Q&A so far today?
So we do have just a question from Kelly. And guys, if you do want to pop any questions, there's a Q&A section right next to the chat function there. So you can pop your questions in there and we'll try and address them now. But Justine and Jamie, can therapists, just regarding therapist travel, can they do the time at half price cost? So what has actually come out with the NDIS changes, whilst also using the code for the kilometres as they're using their own car?
They can definitely still charge the non-labour costs. Yes, definitely. No changes there.
Just waiting to see if there's any other questions, but I think we might, how about if we just delve a little bit deeper into service agreements and why quarantining of funds is so beneficial to service providers?
Yeah, absolutely. I was talking just earlier today around one of the challenges that one of our support coordinators has actually found themselves in. They have a participant on funding periods, and that participant has level 2 and level 3 support coordination provided by different organisations. So the participant has a 1-year plan and they have 60 hours of level 3 support coordination, and they have 24 hours of level 2 support coordination, and they're on quarterly funding periods for support coordination, full stop. So what's happened is, I guess, partly because the support coordination is delivered by 2 different organisations, and there might not have been communication around that, and this is where service agreements absolutely could help. What's happened is that the level 2 support coordination organisation, they were technically only able to, if you carve it up neatly, they were technically only able to deliver 6 hours in that first quarter because they've got 24 hours for the year. Now, that's pretty much what it boils down to, unless there is a little bit of give and take within level 2 and level 3 conversations. So then the level 3 support coordination business, they submitted their invoice and they haven't been able to be paid because the level 2 support coordinator got in earlier and had actually provided more than 6 hours of support in that quarter. So that's a real challenge, and it's not a great situation because someone is potentially out of pocket because that funding period is now exhausted. And the NDIS's advice is that you can't bring, and we physically can't as plan managers, you can't bring funding forward from another future funding period. And once that funding has exhausted, the NDIS says, even if you move into a new funding period, you can't make claims on that invoice. That's what the NDIS says. So in real life, and this is in real life, if those two organizations had actually collaborated and sat down and said, okay, so this is the plan. There's 60 hours for level 3, there's 24 hours for level 2, and this can be applied across not just support coordination, all different services. We've only got whatever maths that adds up to. We've only got this much to work for per quarter. What are you going to deliver? What are you going to deliver? Then give the plan manager, if they're able to, and not all plan managers can do this, but we can, give the plan manager the service agreement, and then that block gets quarantined against you for that quarter. So this situation that we're now finding would never have happened if the service agreements had been sent and if the plan manager was able to quarantine against particular funding periods, not against plans, against funding periods. And I'll just say it again, we can do that. Plan partners can do that.
We absolutely can. Just in addition to that, I think another really good example of that is in category 15, so in the capacity building space, where you could potentially be having a speechy, a psychologist and an OT all working and invoicing out of that same bucket of funds. There's another example where there might be an initial agreement, but then something happens and one provider does need to increase their sessions, and then all of a sudden we see the funding being exhausted. So I think there's another great example of why quarantining funds is so important. I do have another question for you guys from Alice. As a provider, how do we see a funding period? Is it up to the clients to provide this information? Also, is this for new plans or changes to current client plans?
Jamie, do you want to?
Yeah, I'll definitely take this away. So yeah, ultimately any plans kind of being reassessed since that date back there in March, May, I'd like to say, are going to be subject to your Section 33 changes. When it comes to your funding periods, it's going to need to be a really collaborative conversation with the support coordinator if there's one involved, or the plan nominee and participant to be able to get those dates and find out what those funding periods are. Unfortunately, as a plan manager, it's not something we'd be able to provide a service provider. So it's all about collaborating with the support coordinator or plan nominee and participant.
Yeah, that certainly hasn't changed. And that's where providers have always found themselves in a bit of a tricky situation, is not being aware of how much funding is available. And it just comes down to communication.
Yeah, absolutely. And that may probably answer Sophie's question just in regards to what we were talking about, service agreements. So who manages how many hours therapists are allocated to if more than one therapist is accessing a support, i.e. a speechy and an occupational therapist? Who determines how many hours each therapist gets?
The participant. Ultimately, look, I think that definitely that comes back to conversations with the support coordinator and the participant or the nominee. There just needs to be that open and transparent conversation, doesn't there? That all of those issues can be resolved. And yes, it is really like that situation that I just highlighted then. It's definitely something that people are talking about every single day across every single type of service within the NDIS, is that it's not common and probably not ideal that one provider provides all the support. So you're definitely going to have different providers providing supports from one component. So yeah, it definitely has to be that collaboration with if there is a support coordinator or the participant nominee themselves.
Yeah. And Alice has just asked whether a provider can ask for a copy of the plan as part of this being a collaborative approach, but generally service providers aren't going to be given a copy of the plan or the funding. Only support coordinators and participants or their families would be able to see the funding on a plan. And although very frustrating at times and also difficult, this is where it's really important to be having those open conversations with support coordinators and families when you are commencing supports with a participant, to make sure that you understand exactly how many hours are available for you. And whether or not you can actually go ahead and quarantine that funding to make sure that, that risk is avoided, and at the end of the day, your invoices are going to be paid.
Definitely. I think it's probably it's absolutely up to the participant as to whether they want to share their plan with any of their providers. They definitely need to share it with the plan manager, even more so these days, and their support coordinator. But it's ultimately it's the participant's decision as to whether they want to share the plan or a portion of the plan, whatever they want to discuss. But then on the flip side, it's actually up to the provider as to whether they want to provide supports to someone if they haven't been able to understand what they've got, what funding they've got to be able to provide supports with. It is also important for us to acknowledge that we do actually have a provider dashboard. It does not obviously say what funding the participant has in their plan, but it certainly shows the provider their invoices, the status of their invoices, their service agreements, the status of their service agreements. So that's another offering that Plan Partners has, is that they've sort of got a dashboard for everyone. They've got a dashboard for participants, they've got one for support coordinators, and they've absolutely got one for providers as well. So if you're a provider and you've got mutual participants with Plan Partners and you do not have access to your provider dashboard, please do reach out and we will connect you and send you your logins so that you can have an overview of the invoices that you have submitted to Plan Partners for processing.
Yeah. Okay, I do have another question here. And it's in regards to the funding period. So can a provider submit an invoice for a funding period that has passed if no longer in that period? So for instance, today's the 2nd of October, and that's when the invoice is sent, but it was for the 30th of September, for instance.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, an invoice for a previous funding period could definitely be submitted, considering that it is within the same plan period and that there were additional funds left in that plan period that have rolled over into the next one. So provided that it's still within the same plan and those funds were there in the previous period, it absolutely could still be submitted.
I guess the other thing to add there is that, especially with PACE plans, if you do have a participant that moves to another plan manager, so it's sort of related to this conversation now, can you submit invoices for funding periods that have expired or ended? If the plan manager is still managing the plan, then absolutely. With PACE plans, what happens with PACE, and some people might not be aware of it, is that the PACE plans follow the participant. So the old PRODA plans, if you've got an invoice for an old PRODA plan, and the participants move to another plan manager, you need to send your invoice back to the old plan manager. But if your participant, and we're going to see it more and more, if your participant has had multiple PACE plans, then the new plan manager actually picks up all those old PACE plans as well. So that's sort of a little bit of an interesting nuance of PACE plans, and something that plan managers sort of aren't getting paid to do. But we definitely do pick up the old PACE plans and make payments for anything that is remaining from there.
Awesome. I'm just asking the team to pick up some other trends. So if we could possibly just go over, and I know we've just talked about the importance of service agreements, if we could just cover again how service providers actually would go ahead and quarantine funds with us.
Yeah, for sure. Jamie, do you want to? Or do you want me
Yeah,
to?
absolutely, absolutely. So for us to quarantine funds away for your services with one of our mutual participants, we would ultimately require a service agreement that kind of had all of that information on the slide that we will send out as a pack. So of course, your Australian business number, funding periods, amounts that are needed for those funding periods. You'd ultimately create that service agreement, have yourself sign it, have the participant sign it, and then for us, you would send it through to admin@planpartners.com.au. And we'd be able to go ahead and quarantine those funds for you.
Awesome. Thank you. A lot of questions and comments coming in around the allied health space. And I guess we have seen some plans coming out with stated items and how many hours can be used. And then obviously we're seeing plans that are still very, very generic. So in relation to that, it's really, really important that you are having those open conversations with support coordinators and their families to understand what is actually on the plan. Potentially, if you're not knowing exactly what funding's on there, you can actually get a snippet of the hours that have been allocated. If not, otherwise, then it comes down to the support coordinator and the participant to decide how many hours they want to use in a particular support for the duration of that plan. So you're right. I think it's Alison, you're 100% on the money. Those stakeholder meetings and those care meetings are more important than ever. Just having a quick look. Bella, are you picking up any other trends in the chat that we should be going into a little bit more detail on?
Yeah, thank you. Just having a look as well and trying to answer a few of the questions again. And there's just a couple more coming through. One is just how strict are stated support? So can the participants still choose how to use their therapy budgets? If it's sort of mentioning some of the hours that are there, so like 20 hours for OT, 20 hours for speech, is there any flexibility in that category still?
Yeah, that's a bit of a tough one, isn't it? So
Yeah.
the NDIS is definitely moving towards this new language, even though stated line items is not new terminology, but stated components are. Look, the NDIS can't state line items anymore, so they are stating components instead. And in that, they will put a description that's saying your improved daily living budget can be used for speech and OT. Ultimately, choice and control should still have a say in this matter. I'm trying to be as diplomatic as I can right now, because it's only my personal opinion, but if you were to then access physio and in the word of the plan it says this needs to be used for speech and OT, and you send your plan manager a physio invoice, I dare say your plan manager will process that invoice under the improved daily living budget, unless there is instruction not to. So the answer is that, yes, the NDIS is trying to, in some plans, trying to restrict how those allied health therapies are accessed and which therapists can provide support. But it's also not a long bow to draw to say that some people's plans have been built missing some information, missing an element of the functional capacity assessment, missing something at that build stage that actually means that that person is desperately in need of physio. So while choice and control is still a pillar of the NDIS, and while there is no firm determination otherwise, I suggest that a plan manager might process an invoice in improved daily living despite the fact that it says your improved daily living can only be used for speech and OT. That's my feeling of it. Yeah. And I hope that is sufficient.
Well answered, Justine. There was just another question coming from Kay in the chat. So is a lot of this information being provided to our nominees and participants that are with plan partners? Yes, we do send out monthly newsletters to all our participants as well as our providers and support coordinators too. We are also constantly having these conversations through our call center and through our invoicing team as well. So doing our best to get that information out there to everyone to understand, because obviously there's a lot to be across in general.
Gorgeous. There is a question. I've just opened up the chat. Sorry, guys, the Q&A was supposed to be working, but it looks like it's just regular chat, so I do apologise for that. Question around functional capacity assessments and or reports. Can this be charged at a lump sum, or I don't even know if one of our teams answered it, but or does it need to be broken down into hours? You can certainly give a quote to your support coordinator or participant or nominee saying how long or how much the functional capacity assessment or the report's going to cost. But when you send an invoice, it needs to be hours. You can't just send us a lump sum invoice. It needs to be broken down into the hours to represent how much money, how much work you've done for that participant as per the hourly breakdown.
Beautiful.
I think that's just wanting a line item clarification there. Maybe, Riddy, if you can just confirm Diane's line item in the chat for psychology, please.
Sure. Sorry, I just need to. Yeah, I'll post the line item in the chat itself, Diane, so you can just copy and paste it for yourself.
Beautiful. Thank you, Riddy.
And just another couple of questions that have been coming through, and Justine and Jamie, if you could just touch on again the therapies being able to be claimed from core support. So obviously that's a bit of information going out at the moment, but if you can just touch on, I guess, our stance and from taking therapy from core.
Yeah, for sure. So plan partners, when we knew that the 1st of July was approaching and when we knew that the old PAPL stated that disability-related health supports, the therapy related to disability-related health supports, was being removed from the support catalogue from the 1st of July, plan partners took the position that, well, that's that. You can only access your therapy through your improved daily living or your capacity building budgets. Come the 1st of July, the support catalogue was published and wacky-do, those line items remained in the support catalogue, which means that they were still available. They weren't legacied or anything like that. They were still available to claim against. So with the whole approach of the NDIS and the way that where we're moving towards, which is being able to use core and capacity building flexibly. And the NDIS has actually said that on their own website, that when new framework plans do come out, core and capacity building will be flexibly, you'll be able to apply it or use it flexibly. Plan partners have taken the approach that we are definitely going to be more person-centred in this situation, and we're going to continue to claim therapy from a core budget until those line items are locked down by the agency and we're no longer able to do so. But we will absolutely update everybody when we are technically prohibited from being able to process therapy from core.
Awesome.
Thank you.
So Kathy's just joined. So if the IDL budget states that there's 60 hours for OT, for instance, and 20 hours for physio, can you use less hours for OT and more for physio, please?
There's nothing stopping you from doing so. The only caveat or waiver, or not, it's not even a waiver, the only thing that I would add to that is that when you come up to reassessment or check-in or somebody puts an eye on what you've been claiming and the way the plan has been built, the way it's been funded is against those particular therapies. If it's not in line with how that plan, and with the, you see those words all the time now, if you've not been using your plan in the way that it has been built, then you can get a rap over the knuckles. And that could be that you could have your funding periods could be reduced. You could be moved on to agency management, blah, blah, blah. But I think that, like I said before, you know, the people that can advocate really strongly for themselves and say, look, choice and control here, guys. I've got a real need to increase these supports and decrease these supports. I'm not actually trying to rort the system. I'm just trying to live my best life. So yeah, the answer is as plan managers, we don't know the answer to that. The answer is we're with you, and we know what you want, and we're going to help you try and achieve it.
I guess the other hurdle you could potentially run into is whether or not the OT has actually already quarantined that funding as well, which means you wouldn't have access to it if the participants signed off in the service agreement that they want 60 hours for OT, for instance.
But that's one thing that participants and support coordinators, I don't know whether somebody else wants to speak to it, is around being able to alter service agreements as well. Even if you've lodged them, they're not ones that you can't be changed or altered
or released.
And released. So you can go in and release those services. I don't think you can reduce the amount, but you can release entire service agreements through your dashboard. Another amazing tool from plan partners.
I was just going to say it's probably a good time to add that at any time a participant or their support coordinator can release service agreements as well.
I think that's really important with funding periods as well, because you're working with much, not smaller numbers necessarily, but more restricted. You've got a lot more constraints, I suppose you could say. Being able to just go in and release service agreements yourself without waiting for one of the team to do it for you, that actually does put a lot of power back into your hands.
Awesome.
Thank you. Just a question from Anna in regards to the plan years and periods. So if there are outstanding unspent amounts from previous I guess years, can we access that funding to pay for invoices? So I guess Short answer, yes, if it's within the same plan, if there is funding still available. However, if the plan is a new plan and changed plan dates, we can't access that previous plan for the current invoices, if that makes sense. So we essentially have to be paying invoices for the service dates that come through. That's what we're looking at, those service dates. And we would be paying those from the plan that relates to as well. So I hope that answers that, Anna. But
yeah. And that's nothing new. We've
Yeah.
never been able to pay for past plan invoices in new plan dates. We would be putting up a manual claim to the NDIS, but we've also seen that the NDIS has not been super enthusiastic about paying manual claims anymore, because that's the whole overspend dilemma that we've found ourselves in over the last few years. So, yeah, definitely any unspent plan funding, period funding, that is unspent does get rolled over within that current plan.
Perfect.
All right.
Yeah, we'll probably wrap up shortly, but just another one for Justine and Jamie. So do these rules also apply to self-managed participants, or is this just for plan managed?
Rules as in funding periods, or
Yeah,
how to
funding
use your
periods.
plan?
Yeah, that's just the question, but I guess we can answer from a couple of points.
Yeah, so self-managers have always had that flexibility and freedom to be able to draw from different components or budgets or categories, or what do you want to call it these days, in the past. But I do know that there is a heightened scrutiny about where you're pulling your money from as a self-manager. So yeah, I think that you just need to answer for it at the end of the day. However, if you're a self-manager, you just need to be able to be, I don't know, beat your drum about why you did what you did. And that's why you're self-managing, is that you've been given the nod that you have the capacity to do so.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. There's always going to be a certain level of reasonable and necessary to things. But yeah, I think just adding to that the funding periods changes, they're definitely going to be across all plans, not just your plan managed or agency managed. So yeah.
Have we popped the links in the chat for?
I've popped in our plan partners links, but I might just redo it because there's been a fair few questions that have come in since. So I'll pop them in now.
Gorgeous. Jamie.
Amazing. So yeah, everybody, that basically concludes today's webinar. I would like to thank everyone who joined us today, and I would like to thank everybody who participated in our Q&A session. For anybody interested in attending any of our future events, please do head to Eventbrite and follow along Plan Partners. In the coming days, we will send out a copy of this pack, as well as some resources and some responses to any questions that we weren't able to answer on the call. Thank you, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.